Good morning, everyone. This webinar, to this policy exchange on industrial data sharing of Orgalim Policy Exchange. My name is Daniel van Jensen. I'm from from the working group Digital Transformation of Orgalim. I'm the chair over there. I'm the deputy director of legal at the VDMA, and I welcome you to this policy exchange of Orgalim. Before we start, I will have some quick house rules. As you might have noticed, this event is recorded and will be shared afterwards. All attendees are muted. If you want to ask some questions, please use the chat. The chat will be monitored and we will discuss those questions afterwards in the Q&A session. And if you want to have a look at the agenda, you will find a section, the hands-out section, within the GoToWebinar program, the hands-out sections. There you will find also the speaker's bios and the latest Orgalim position papers on industrial data. And with those simple house rules, I will come to the agenda. You will find the opening remarks soon, and then the moderated panel discussion. Afterwards, we will lead over to Q&A sessions from the audience. So please ask your questions in the chat, and then we will try to finish around 11:30 with the closing remarks. And with this very short introduction, I will give the floor to Orgalim's Director General Malte Lohan. Please introduce yourself, and you have the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel, and a very good morning to everyone joining us today. Many of you, of course, will know Orgalim. We represent Europe's technology manufacturers, so covering ICT, electronics, mechanical, electrical engineering, machinery, and metal technology. It's about 770,000 companies in these sectors across Europe, and most of them are mid-caps and small companies. In total, we represent about a third of Europe's industry. Now, our industries cover everything from industrial robots to microchips, equipment for renewable energy production and for smart energy grids, to charging infrastructure for electric vehicles or 5G components. And what all of those companies have in common is the cutting edge technologies that they make. And these are, of course, at the core of Europe's digital and climate transformation. Just consider the different aspects of transformation which Europe is working on. Smart, connected products are central to all of them. And that means data, lots of data. So we all know that data is the new fuel driving our economies, and the volume of data is, of course, exploding worldwide. What we see here is the widely cited estimation that the volume of data will reach 181 zettabytes in 2025. So doubling more or less the current volumes this year. And no surprise where this growth is coming from. It's from IoT. It's from connected devices. Currently, we have about 15 billion connected IoT devices worldwide. That's already double the number of people living on the planet and set to continue growing rapidly. Now, the data revolution, of course, is not just about the amount of data. It's also about the way in which data is processed and stored. And this too is changing dramatically. Currently, most data is still processed centrally, typically in the cloud. But that picture is changing rapidly. Within a few years, we actually expect that 80% of the processing will take place in the smart connected objects themselves, in the cars, in the home appliances, in the industrial robots, and so on. That's what's called processing data at the edge, and that is a fundamental change. So with the fast growing volumes of data produced and the dramatic change in which these data are processed, there will be plenty of new opportunities for European companies to claim new markets. And we want Europe to take advantage of that, especially in the industrial applications, which are our undisputed historical strengths. So this is what we mean by the industrial Internet of Things. And it's already happening. The use of the industrial IoT has become a central part of commercial practice for our industries because the benefits are obvious. Data flows make it possible to increase manufacturing productivity, to tap into new efficiency gains, and at the same time enables new data-driven services, new data-driven business models. And it's benefiting a broad range of companies, not just a few. Look at some of the well-known examples. For example, predictive maintenance in production processes. Data which is related to the functioning of the machines can indicate when maintenance or repair is needed, fixing the problems before they occur. Look at logistics and mobility. IoT is widely used in fleet management systems to improve efficiency, to minimize risks. Each machine is connected to provide real-time energy monitoring, performance analysis, and makes the fleet operations more efficient and reduces waste. Or take energy. Smart grids are another example of industrial IoT in action. So data coming from smart grids can be used to increase efficiency, to detect anomalies, to align the supply and demand of energy. And it creates tangible benefits for the environment, reducing the energy used, and for consumers, reducing costs. What we see in all of these and the numerous other applications of industrial IoT is the direct link between the use of industrial data and Europe's sustainability goals. The landscape for data-driven business models is still young, and it is constantly evolving. Companies are constantly innovating how they can use data to create more value, and we want to preserve and support that innovative energy. A central instrument for doing that is commercial contracts. So the contracts determine how the data will be used and shared between the different parts of the industrial supply chain. And Orgalim is also playing its part here. We published a legal guide on industrial data that gives guidance on how companies can approach the data aspects of their contracts in B2B scenarios. And it's all about helping companies better recognize the value of their own data and support the development of balanced, mutually beneficial commercial practices based on data within our industry. Now, the reason we're together today is that the EU is about to adopt a comprehensive set of new rules governing how data can be processed and shared. And as we saw before, the connected objects, especially in industrial IoT applications, are at the heart of the potential of the data economy. So to unlock that potential, it is really key that the new data rules that apply to those connected objects are fit for purpose. And we have warned that the stakes are high because we could easily get the rules wrong and accidentally damage our company's future data competitiveness rather than invigorating it. Let me mention a few fundamental points that are important to close. First, there is no one size fits all. Rules will need to reflect different contexts in which data are shared and used, especially they need to recognize that B2B settings, business to business settings, are different than business to consumer settings. The legal framework needs to remain flexible. And what I mean by that is it needs to leave sufficient room for contractual freedom on how data is governed. And trade secrets must be protected. This is really essential, and especially in the time when we see ever increasing cyber attacks that are already putting our trade secrets at risk. Let us make sure that the data rules protect our trade secrets in the right way. Finally, interoperability will have to play an important role. And policy can certainly help support interoperability. We already have a lot of industry-led initiatives that are supporting interoperability in data sharing within and across industrial sectors. Let me mention a couple. We have new data protocols for machines talking to machines, called OPC UA for the geeks among us. We have data protocols for the digital twin, called the Asset Administration Shell. And there are plenty others, of course. And the potential of all of these initiatives needs to be really recognized and exploited with the new data rules. So that is what we are focused on, and I'm excited about the discussion today to help shine a light on how we get that right. Let me extend a particular welcome and thanks to MEP Pilar del Castillo for joining us this morning as well, to share where the Parliament's work is. And with this, I hand back to Daniel, our moderator for today.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to turn on the camera again. Okay, thank you so much, Malte, for those introduction. Let me quickly extend on this, the context why we're meeting today, before I hand over the floor to Ms. de Castillo. As Malte mentioned already, there's a comprehensive set of new rules. It's called the Data Act. You might be aware of it, that at the end of February 2002, the European Commission published a proposal for new rules for a fair and innovative data economy. With this proposal, the Commission aims actually to stimulate a competitive data market, open opportunities for data-driven innovation, and make data more available and accessible for all. Clearly, this transition to a data-driven economy is of paramount importance for the future growth and competitiveness of our industry. As the Data Act moves now to the Council and the European Parliament for adoption, it is of utmost importance to discuss the impact of the proposed regulation on industry. Indeed, the extensive new obligation imposed on manufacturers can have substantial costs for technology and industries that we must be aware of. And with this very short introduction of the Data Act, I will give the floor to MEP de Castillo. I'm very happy to have you here. Thank you for your opening remarks. You have the floor. You have the floor? Mr. Castillo?
Yes, I am just waiting for.
Your opening remarks are up now. Thank you.
Okay. Well, good morning to you all. It's a pleasure, I must say, to participate in this digital event organized by Orgalim. Orgalim was one of the first in contacting me and my office, and all your insights has been very welcome, I must say. Well, we are all, I think, all agree that data is fundamental for the European digital economy and data collaboration within and across Europe's industries will be a key to future innovation and economic growth. However, while the volume of data is expected to increase dramatically in coming years, data reuse is hampered by low trust in data sharing, conflicting economic interests, and technological obstacles. I must say that this is unfortunate due to its outstanding global competitive position in manufacturing. Europe holds large amounts of industrial data with the potential, a potential that I think we all agree that is yet underused. Consequently, the Data Act can be an absolute game changer if it can create a data agile ecosystem that enables easy access to an almost infinite amount of high quality industrial data. The Data Act is a key part of a wider European data strategy. In that sense, the recently adopted Data Governance Act has increased trust in data sharing and strengthened mechanisms to increase data availability and overcome technical obstacles to the reuse of data. And the Data Act is the next ambitious step, a regulation that will apply at European level. And that this is a precondition to avoid the market fragmentation that sooner than later could emerge from individual national regulators. The Data Act objective is a triple one. First, clarifying rights on IoT data. Second, governing when businesses are required to share their data with public bodies. And thirdly, improving switching between data processing services. Allow me to focus on the first two objectives. Regarding access to IoT data, the underlying principle of the regulation is that the user must have access to the data produced by the connected products and related services, and consequently be able to share it. However, this is a statement that is easier said than done, I have to say. The Data Act will be, on the other hand, a horizontal regulation that might affect business differently, depending on the products and manufacture or their role in the aftermarket. I believe, just a minute, some water. I believe the starting point must be to clarify what data falls under the scope of the obligations of the Data Act. You yourself from Orgalim and many other stakeholders I met during the last months, that was one of the first concerns that they have regarding the proposal, the original proposal, so the proposal of the Commission. So that was something that I have tried to introduce further clarification on the concept of data, the data that are in, the data that are out of the scope of this proposal. Well, accordingly, the draft clarifies the data that falls under the scope of the different chapters: business to government, data sharing, and cloud switching entail, all of them, a broad range of data. Chapters 2 and 3 refer exclusively to data generated from unconnected products or related services. Regarding this IoT data, my report highlights that for starters, we are referring to data to which the data holder has access, something that was not clear at the beginning. In a scope, our data, so in our data in a raw form as well as prepared data. That is, data cleaned and transformed prior to processing and analysis. In other words, data that is pre-processed for the purpose of making it usable without, however, reaching the stage of deriving or inferring insights. Out of the scope are derived or inferred data. This means data resulting from software or hardware processes that calculate derivative insights from the data generated by the use of a product. In addition, data is produced by prototypes or products that not placed in the market. So prototypes or products not placed in the market should be as well excluded in order not to hamper previous investments and respect IP rights and trade secrets. Having said that, I think in my view is a further clarification that made quite clear to my understanding what kind of data we are talking about when the scope of data is considered. Likewise, the Commission proposal seems to have a simple approach, sometimes complicated, regarding sometimes complicated value chains of products, data, and services, which can, in occasion, produce an array of dependencies and multiply data holders, data holders. For this reason, I have introduced further guidance in the report by clarifying how this regulation applies to the different actors, in particular on who would be responsible for providing data access to the user, and potentially also to the data recipient. Other IoT provisions introduced that I would like to mention are related to enlarging the exclusion of the data sharing obligation of Chapter 2 to medium-sized enterprises and further coordination of public authorities. So this is another aspect regarding medium-sized enterprises, which were not inside, were only micro and small enterprises, and I thought and I think that was interesting to include medium-sized enterprises. Now, allow me to touch upon Chapter 5, which is the B2G. Well, to start, as the pandemic has shown, the B2G chapter of the Data Act can be instrumental in cases where public authorities need data to overcome a crisis. However, there is uncertainty on the term exceptional circumstances that would oblige businesses to share data free of charge with public administration. I must say that while I do share the case for these requirements to respond to a public emergency, I believe that for the rest of the scenarios of Article 15, there should be fair remuneration, which at the very least covers the cost of processing and sharing the data requests. I think that this is a way forward if we are trying to create a functioning data market. On the one hand, public authorities would be able to use valuable data in many scenarios, and at the same time, if there is fair remuneration, the private sector would be encouraged to participate in the data market. In addition, there is a risk that a lack of coordination may result in a multiplicity of requests of data and a justified pressure on the data holders. For this reason, member states should have in place governance mechanisms to manage such situations, in particular for the request of data. Lastly, we must not forget that authorities are trusted with data that is not public and therefore sensitive. This is the reason, therefore, that they acquire a certain level, I must say, of responsibility at the same time. Consequently, liability and transparency are a must. To finalize, I must insist that the Data Act is a horizontal legislation that will be directly applicable through the entire European Union and will set the principle of sectorial legislation to come. With this draft I presented, which is a now public draft, as you know, we have kicked off the parliamentary debate that will set the European Parliament position before entering into interinstitutional negotiation with Council. So you know the timetable is not necessary. I refresh it now, and I must say thank you very much. Was a very useful and interesting for me opportunity to be here today. And beyond that, as I said in my starting, I want to, and I appreciate very much your contribution from Orgalim and all the insights you provide. At the end of the day, it is absolutely necessary to know well and take into account the stakeholders' position, and you manage very well the one you represent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. De Castillo, and thank you so much for outlining already parts of the report you delivered. We read it with very much and great interest. Let me quickly ask you two more questions before we go to the panel. If you look back at the Data Act, or if you look at the Data Act, where do you see actually the biggest opportunities and maybe also the shortcomings of the Data Act? That's our first question to you. And the second one would be, so how would you actually address the concerns of industry, actually that the Data Act is too broad? Malte mentioned it before, that one size fits all is always in danger of overshooting tendencies in one way and probably shortcomings in the other way. So how would you address those concerns of industry? Thank you.
Yeah, well, regarding the positive consequences, so the outcomes that the data can bring, you know, for the industry in general, and the industry related to manufacture and the IoT specific sector, I think this is enormous, the possibility. Since the industrial data is growing, it's a growing competitive asset for Europe, you know, and a competitive advantage. So I think in a context as it is the current economic context has under harsh international competition, Europe can optimize these possibilities. For a long time, data available in general terms, let's say data available mostly for the companies that were managing those data are the ones related to the platforms. It could be the logistic one, it could be the social relation one, it could be the search engines. I mean, that was the main source of that, and it continued to be a very extremely important source. But you know, with the development of IoT, there is a new and vast field in which incredible amount of data is going to be produced. And I think that's something that we cannot really lose, I mean, in Europe. In terms of our global competitiveness, in terms of the economic global competitiveness, the industry is still in Europe, and mostly the manufacturing industry plays a very important role in that sense. So it is really the main asset, I would say, in terms of our industry, that it can compete at global level. But for doing that, I mean, if you have in your hands an asset like this infinite amount of infinite amounts indeed of data coming from IoT, I think it's extraordinary. That can benefit the manufacturer producer, can benefit the ones that can use those data, that they clarify and make it clear what is in and what is out in the scope. I think there is a solution quite reasonable in terms of IP, trade secrets, and all these kind of things. So this is something that we have to really, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity. Is not the policymakers of the Commission the one that we're going to put in practice, you know, and develop in practical terms that, because this is the different companies, and users, and all kind of, you know, from the producer to the one that would like to use some this metadata, you know, that I mentioned as the one that are in. So there's so many possibilities. So this is a way to facilitate, it's an enable. You see, the Data Act is constitute kind of enable tool for doing that. That's my vision.
Okay, thank you so much for elaborating on it. And with those words, now let's move on to the discussion. I would now introduce you to the speakers that will join Ms. De Castillo. Let me introduce you first, Mr. Lewandowski. He's a legal policy officer at DG Connect at the European Commission. Jussi Mäkinen, Director EU Regulation Technology Industry of Finland, and Christiane Mann, she's Vice President Industry Affairs Smart Infrastructure at the Siemens AG and Chair of the TND Europe Smart Grids Microgrids Working Group, long title. Thank you so much for all joining us today. I would now start with Mr. Lewandowski, and I would kindly ask everyone else to turn off the camera and invite everyone that I speak to turn on the camera. Thank you, Mr. Lewandowski. Thank you first to be here. And I will start with the two questions that we prepared for you. Where do you see actually the data economy in a couple of years? And how will the Data Act actually influence that future? Second questions that you might be able to elaborate on is, as the Data Act does envision a very broad approach across industry like the GDPR, why was a sectoral approach not feasible in your opinion? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to speak to this wide and informed audience and to be able to exchange views with the panel, within the panel, and with anyone else who likely is going to join and ask questions. This obviously is very helpful for us, the Commission, as the originator of the Data Act and as policymaker of the data policy approach in Europe to be able to basically learn from you, to confront our views, and to improve what we are doing. So thanks for the questions. I think the first question is quite quite difficult in the sense that it can easily just be transformed into fortune telling if I now start imagining how the data economy will look in a couple of years from now, because as we know, the world around us is changing so quickly, it's quite difficult to predict. So the main, I think, the main element or the main thing to retain about the data economy is obviously that it goes hand in hand with the technological progress. And just as our society and economy is becoming increasingly digital, almost automatically, I would say, this implies the growth of the data economy, because as we say, the lifeblood of or the backbone of the digital economy and society is precisely data. So on the one hand, I'm quite optimistic, quite positive about the fact that actually data economy in Europe will continue to grow. And all our studies show from the last 5 to 10 years that the data economy, so the number of companies using data for their economic benefit, the role that data is playing in Europe's economy, especially, but also society, to fight different sociological and social problems and challenges, is increasing every single year. So even possibly, without European intervention, the data economy would continue to grow. So now the question, of course, is, can we do something to make sure that this positive impact of data on growth, on GDP growth, on the competitiveness of European companies is increased? And this is basically our main objective. So what we try to achieve is to make sure that, from the already quite sizable impact that the data has on the economy in terms of more than 2% GDP that could be attributed, or around more than 250 billion euros annually, that we reach a stage by 2025, let's say, where this is equivalent to 800 billion and almost 6% of GDP. So it's worth fighting for. Now, the question, as I mentioned before, is, what kind of data economy we will have in 2025, 2030, 2040. Because we have seen how the current evolution of the digital economy has led to the emergence of certain phenomena that perhaps we would not like to see replicated in the future, like the rise, of digital platforms and the concentration of data itself and the data expertise in the hands of a few multinational giants. So what we try to make sure is that as we are now entering into this, IoT technology era, we, in just a really short period of time, we will no longer be talking about IoT as the technology of the future. It will simply be our everyday experience, and we try to be prepared for this in the best possible way. So I can imagine that, just like we have seen this sort of evolution from the data being produced more and more simply by the fact that we are using more and more different digital services, and by the fact that, for instance, sensors are being fitted everywhere and they are getting smaller and smaller. So we have this sort of technological, or first we had maybe on the supply side, we had a kind of technological progress which was quite visible, which made it possible to generate a lot of data. And with time, this created a situation where, of course, we needed to find out smart ways of what to do with the data. So we have been, first talking about the big data technologies and how to deal with the velocity and the volume and variety of the data just a few years ago. Now we are already talking about artificial intelligence, and in fact, soon you are talking about metaverse and completely new ways of living in a digital environment where we are completely surrounded by data. So I think we will see this sort of move in a way from the supply of data, which is abundant already. I don't think we can say there isn't that there's insufficient quantity of data around us. On the contrary, there's maybe too much of the data, in the sense that we are still struggling to make sense of it, to put it to practice, to put it to use. And so we will see this shift from supply to demand. And this is what we also, as European policymakers, try to make sure that Europe is prepared, that we will see more and more demand for data from companies, from the public sector as well, and that we equip Europe's economy to be able to do something useful with the data. And we want this sort of European data economy to, of course, respect certain values, which to some extent for which we already have a stable framework, for instance, when we talk about personal data protection, but we also need to have some basic framework rules to be prepared for the IoT technology to really sort of surround us in all aspects of our lives, and for the data to be able to be used in a fairer, in a wider way, in a more balanced way across the whole economy. So how the Data Act plays into this? Well, the role of the Data Act, I think this was already mentioned before, the few main objectives of Data Act. So we hope that the Data Act will influence the data economy in a way which was intended, meaning that we basically look at certain problems, bottlenecks, and obstacles which are out there in the data economy, and we see how much of it we can address via legislative means. And so the ones that we identified for the purpose of the Data Act are, well, precisely those which are, or the most important ones are those that are related to the IoT technology, meaning that we have seen in some markets, in some sectors, where the usage of data coming from connected devices is already sort of mainstream. We have seen certain developments that perhaps we would not like to see replicated across the whole economy. And this has to do with a sort of very privileged role of those entities that actually produce or manufacture, design connected objects, and is usually at the expense of the other co-generator of such data, which is the user of all these connected devices. So let's say the main role of the Data Act in this IoT context is to kind of rebalance the position of the users of connected objects versus manufacturers, the original data holders. This is something that was clearly a big sort of policy, strategic sort of vision that that was, I think, displayed already in the at the level of the data strategy, and our commissioner, as well as Vice President Vestager, has always sort of insisted on the need of making sure that we are no longer trapped in the, let's say, in the hands of, as we have seen until now, mostly big digital platforms that have created their own sort of environments from which it's very difficult to free oneself. We want to make sure that once we approach the IoT world, where everything is connected and everything produces data, that we also, as users, often consumers, but of course users can also be companies, that we are well prepared to actually use the data to our benefit in a fair way, so that there are no obstacles to this. Coupled with this is also rebalancing the position of the smaller economic actors like SMEs, and particularly even the smaller ones like startups, which are often very innovative and have great ideas, but cannot do much with the data because they cannot fairly access this data. So, or they have very low bargaining power when they negotiate access to data. So for that, we have also specific provisions in the Data Act, and it's another big objective of the Data Act to empower the user, one thing, but empower also the smaller, less economically powerful actors within the economy, to allow them to take a full role within the data economy. We've also, that was already mentioned, of course, the public sector. We want the public sector to play a big role and to be enabled as well. And for this, we have a whole chapter in the Data Act where we see, even though it's relatively narrow the way I see it, because it's limited to rather exceptional situations, nevertheless, it is a big problem, and the public sector has continuously complained that in the current environment where both public and private is becoming digitized, you know, the public sector also needs more and better access to data. So I think overall the Data Act is about sort of rebalancing the position of the main actors that are playing already active in the data economy, and making sure that all the amount of data which is coming very soon, this whole wave of, as Mr. Breton put it, in industrial data, although it does not necessarily need to be industrial, is actually put to use. So I think this is how I see sort of the role of the Data Act. And maybe very quickly, the last question that you mentioned, which is about choosing the horizontal approach rather than a sectoral one. Well, this is, let's say, in line with what I said. We want to make sure that we do not see certain problems with how the value out of data is distributed among different actors, which is already happening in some sectors where IoT is much more, let's say, mainstream. We do not want to see this replicated across all other sectors, meaning that we need to have some common principles across all sectors. Secondly, you know, there's a real danger that if we don't have this, then as different devices become more and more data enabled, we'll have completely different rules. Let's say, not only within sectors, but even for just different categories of connected devices. So that there's a real danger that this would really make the whole, you know, legal landscape very complicated, very complex, and also would encourage, for instance, member states to start legislating on their own in those areas where, for instance, IoT is not yet coming, but is likely to come in the future. So we want to be prepared upfront and have a basic level of principles such as user empowerment and so forth, which would be applicable across the entire EU economy. That is the kind of philosophy behind it. Is it possible to do it on a sectoral basis? Well, it is possible to, everything is possible, and as I said, the data economy would keep on growing as well, but we think that we would make the legal landscape unnecessarily complicated and potentially fragmented as well.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. I now have to quickly give over to the next panelist, but thank you so much for elaborating on it. So I would ask now Ms. Mann, 2 more questions. If you want to turn on your camera perfectly, thank you. What impact do you expect from the Data Act on existing or new businesses is the first question. And the second one that we would like to hear your opinion on is regarding access to data. what is your biggest hope or fear of access rights to data? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Orgalim, for inviting me to participate and giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the grid technology manufacturers of Europe. We are organized in T&D Europe, and we have the technologies that are required to future-proof the electrical grid. Data have always played a role in the energy sector. Using data in the energy sector to understand and manage the flow of electricity per se is nothing new. However, the scale and the breadth of data availability and data usage will change significantly going forward and has some implications for the industry. Electricity grids are a strategic asset in the climate neutral energy transition in Europe. They are the backbone of Europe's energy system, and electricity is an essential and critical resource in the daily life of all Europeans. We do not want any kind of disruption in our electricity supply, particularly not as we electrify more and more sectors. Grid resiliency is a key concern, and rightly so, given its criticality, the EU has designated electricity generation and transmission as critical infrastructure, and that's quite important to remember. Data will play an ever-increasing role in the energy sector, be it for asset management, for load balancing, for energy consumption, energy trading, also as a basis for investment decisions or for modeling. Therefore, it is so crucial to get the Data Act right. Unfortunately, the proposal of the Data Act falls short, and it does fail to reflect current industrial realities. So what do I mean if I say that? One of the things is that the Data Act assumes that the IoT asset provider is the data holder. In the B2B space, unlike the B2C space, the B2B space, the user of the physical asset typically is the data holder. The assumption that the manufacturer is the data holder fails to reflect the realities of our industry. It is overly simplified. Even if all primary and secondary components and the software service are being provided by one corporation, let's say a manufacturer and a software service provider, the enterprise is not allowed to access customers' data without a contractual agreement. So the industrial reality that the Data Act fails to reflect is that, let's say in our case, the T&D manufacturers and our customers, we actually enter a contractual agreement. As manufacturer, we sell the devices, sometimes install the systems, we may maintain the systems, but in order to get the data, we have to enter contractual agreements. And these contractual agreements govern the sharing of data. Customers specify what type of data is required, who should handle it, and who can have access. Such an agreement ensures the fulfillment of all legal requirements, be it GDPR requirements or the protection of intellectual property and trade secrets. It also helps to protect critical infrastructure or cover international data flows. So the Data Act oversimplifies, misstates the relationship between the manufacturers and the customers. Complex industrial value chains are neither reflected nor considered. Industrial data relationships are much more complex than anything you find in the B2C environment. And by the way, industrial data are highly complex, distributed, and real time. It's not that we make an app for our customers, on the contrary. Additionally, the Data Act introduces far-reaching obligations, access by design, making data available free of charge to data users and third parties. And some of these regulations seem unreasonable and unbalanced. A manufacturer sells a machine to a company. He gets access to data via contractual agreement to maintain the equipment. Part of the agreement may be that he is chartered to increase the efficiency of the overall factory of the process. And if he is able to reduce processing time by a fraction of a second, this is intellectual property. This is intellectual property of the manufacturer. This is intellectual property of the corporation. And this is part of the corporation's core process that as a company we have to protect. Sharing this kind of information free of charge is a danger to any kind of company. So in our point of view, access to data and data sharing stipulations are too broad, too vague. Also, it regulates aspects of the business that so far were governed by contractual and entrepreneurial freedom. There's actually a market. There is lots of players in the market. Data sharing can be excessive. Millions of data points are being generated, and there is no stipulation to share back data with the manufacturer. Some of these conditions in the Data Act feel like the manufacturers only have a burden, but not a benefit. One of the CEOs I spoke with clearly said, how does this, if I have to share my data for free, how does that incentivize me to invest in more intelligence and software service models? I already mentioned it, and I want to add a little bit to it. Data sharing requirements must comply with potentially conflicting considerations, such as the need to protect critical infrastructure. If you have the data for the electrical grid and you know how to analyze this data, you know the most critical points where to attack. GDPR considerations have to be complied with, trade secrets and intellectual property. Some of these shared data can give insight into the design of primary assets and disclose manufacturers' know-how. Some of the things we have not talked about, software as a service models, they should be completely out of scope. Smart devices do not come for free. Additional significant cost and burden of upgrading already installed connected devices will be occurred, so sharing data for free is unrealistic and not economical. While I understand the notion to make it a level playing field, also for small players, small does not necessarily mean financially not powerful. If a small company is a software expert, they might have much more power than any large company. That is to say, it's a complicated field. So impact of sharing data for free can impact new fields of business for growth. If software as a service offerings are inside the scope of the Data Act, it creates legal uncertainty. The provision that a customer can switch service providers with only 30 days notice ignores current contractual realities and B2B transactions, and the lack of opportunity to recover investment via new service models because data must be shared free of charge could undermine the willingness to innovate. So there's a lot of things where we have some issues with. I want to close with one aspect. The Data Act is a huge opportunity. Unfortunately, it offers ambiguity and vagueness where precise definitions are urgently needed. I already mentioned the aspect of data holder. The data holder concept in the industrial space is misunderstood, not specified. There is no clarification of data holders versus users, data processors, data operators in the data space. The biggest point I have is data does not equal data, which makes this whole discussion so difficult and conflicting. There is no distinction. There are no clear definitions between what are shareable data and what are non-shareable data. I've heard in the last weeks lots of new expressions and word creations All of these are unspecified, and they will not facilitate the process of delivering on the aspiration of the Data Act. Industrial realities and industrial data flows must be acknowledged, respected, incorporated in the overall aspirations of the Data Act. B2B is not B2C. So in the current form, the Data Act misses an opportunity, and it could potentially even jeopardize the objectives of the Data Act to foster a data economy. Daniel, back to you.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Then let's quickly switch to the next panelist, Jussi. Thank you for turning on your camera. We prepared one question for you that actually came up already in the discussion. So we would be very keen to know your opinion on if a differentiation between B2C and B2B help to actually mitigate the biggest concerns of industry regarding the Data Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And this question was quite well addressed by Christiane on her remarks. I think that yes, and it's quite clear that the Commission has prepared this proposal from the standpoint of the user. And when you look from the standpoint of a user, every company looks like a platform, and there is a need to serious balancing, I guess. But Christiane very well pointed out the constellations in business-to-business value chains in data are much more complex and much more longer and wider than in the business-to-customer relations. And we have to remember that on business-to-customer relations, it's usually, or in most cases, it's the personal data meant in the GDPR. And there, actually, we already have the data portability right. So we have some existing legal ground to build on. On business-to-business side, in the contrary, there are only these contracts, and actually these contracts have quite a lot of value there because they are so flexible, and they can be used between the parties on a quite flexible way to build that trust to which MEP De Castillo actually referred to. And we as technology industries in Finland have tried to build actually on that trust and create something for the business users to help them draft those contracts. So we launched our model terms already in 2019, and now they are developed into this Orwellian legal guide, which is freely available, also directly from this event. But from our membership, I can perhaps try to highlight it by, so we have machinery producers who produce, for example, paper machines. These machines can be 140 meters long and have thousands of data points. So it's completely different compared to another example from our membership. So let's take a Suunto hand computer, which is quite different piece of machinery, and they are now being tackled by the same piece of legislation. Perhaps my solution would be found that especially on so we need perhaps real-time some improvements in the data portability when it comes especially to standards and the and that the data should be real-time, and this is the improvement that this proposal would bring there. However, on the business-to-business side, it needs to be quite clear what is the level of the mandated data sharing by the Data Act. And I think it needs to be rather basic. Why? Because then you have to take into account that that user actually can be the manufacturer's direct competitor. So it's essential importance that the businesses are in a position where they can protect their competitive assets. And I think that is quite clear from the EU acquis as well, where the competition law has been one of the cornerstones. And then on top of that comes a layer also to which Christiane were excellently referred to, and it's the level of contracts. By virtue of contract, you can share more valuable and more sensitive data to the ones that you trust, the partners in your network that are important and you want to share it with them. And perhaps one example I would like to take from the challenges of having a mandated one-size-fits-all solution is the other definitions. So when we drafted our own model terms in 2019, we couldn't, for example, define what the data is. It had to be left for the parties to define. And then there are quite many actually detailed questions which are of great importance for business-to-business relations. You have access, you need to agree on modalities of access to data. How can you make it cyber secure and so forth. And then also another point that was already mentioned, but I would like to highlight important, is that now this new regulation needs to send a balanced benchmark for the access of data, reasonable and fair access to data of all parties in the value chain. And now this has been prepared from the user side of things. But in industrial relations, actually, it would be highly valuable also for component manufacturers, for material providers, to have some access, at least, to research and for the purposes of research and development for quality control and diagnostics, for example.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your answers on that questions. We would now continue with the second round of the panel. And I would invite Ms. De Castillo, if she has at all any reactions to the statements she has heard.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Can you hear me, or you need?
I can hear you, but I cannot see you.
Yeah. Well, I take note of all things you have mentioned. The process has not finished, so you know that during the debate on amendments until the final compromises, well, of course, many different political groups and members of those who will present amendments, and the rapporteur also herself in this case can introduce new amendments, and then still there's room for further tuned different things or introduce new things. So in that sense, I appreciate very much this debate. But I have something for Christiane Mann from the energy sector, which I will appreciate very much. Although Siemens, which is in Orgalim and through Orgalim mostly, I am not sure if it is in the BDI as well, but in that case also through the BDI, that I had also many different meetings with them. Well, they have been sending inputs, position papers, and so on and so forth. But in this case, particular case, Christiane, you referred to the energy sector. And I must say that the energy sector was not active practically at all in this dossier. Since in energy is also in my parliamentary committee, I've been very much insisting on the possibility for data in general. I mean, it is not on this data act, for example, in energy efficiency management, as one field that can have a great impact in my view. But in any case, since still we have time, I will appreciate very much if you can send it to me, based on what you have formulated in your intervention, position paper, or I will be delighted to have a meeting with you and anyone of the energy sector that consider that they want to really explain further on the specific visions from the energy sector. Together with this, we have the Commission here, and I'm sure the Commission can, answer some of your concerns. But I insist on the bilateral with Parliament. Please, if you have the possibility to send me a position paper or to have a meeting, I will appreciate very much, because I am also taking a lot of care of different aspects of energy, since my committee is also dealing with energy. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. And that leads us also directly to the next panelist. And I'm asking him for his reaction, if he has any, to the panelists. Mr. Lewandowski, if you want to react to the statements you have heard, especially from industry. And I might ask you, not personally you, but every one of the panelists to keep the time in mind. So please have a short answer. Thank you.
Yes, I'll try to be very brief. So yes, thank you for, emphasizing some of the topics which are, of course, important in this discussion. And I think it is indeed true that we are in the sort of beginning of co-legislation, which is a longer road where we can still fine-tune certain elements and flesh out others, and still modify the proposal in case some elements are not clear, or we are not sure how they are going to affect this or that sector, or this or that entity. So clearly there is still room for improvement. The proposal, we stand of course by the proposal, and we think that it's good, and it's we are going to fight for as much as we can to make sure that the objectives which were set prior to the drafting are actually still or could still be achieved, but the actual language in the legislative text can still change. So let's try to work all together, obviously, for the common benefit. But some of the elements which were already outlined, I think, you see, it is true, of course, that one of the big objectives was to empower the user, so that we needed to look at this sort of simplified triangular constellation where we have the original data holder, the user, and all the companies, the so-called third parties that also rely and ask for access to the data. And I hear that on many occasions, or in many sort of setups, actually the user is already fine, is already in a position to get the data, and this is agreed on a contractual level, and there is actually no problem with the user's empowerment, so there's no point in legislating. And I mean, my answer to such arguments is that simply, well, great. So it's one of the objectives that we are aiming with this legislation. So in situations where the user is already getting sufficient access to the data and can do something useful with it, I see no real problem. Simply the legislation will then apply to other situations in other sectors, perhaps, where this is not so clear cut. So no problem here. I mean, if there is nothing to fix, the Data Act will not need to fix it, and that's completely normal. Now, if we talk, and we receive a lot of calls, and we have had, obviously, prior to drafting the proposal, many contacts with companies from across various markets. When we talk to the groups or those who represent the users, such as operators of big fleets of vehicles in the mobility sectors, when we talk to repairers of smart home appliances, when we talk to consumers associations, now they will tell us and will tell you that it's fine to arrange things on a contractual basis, but the reality is that they are missing the data which they need, and they do not see themselves being let's say treated fairly. So the idea behind the Data Act is to make sure that those who control, as we said, de facto, because there is no actual intellectual property right on data as such. So those who control the data due to technical design cannot somehow abuse this advantage and should, so that others who really depend on such data, like repairers, I mean, you cannot repair now a connected device if you don't have a fair access to the data. So all that the repairers want and all that users may want is to have a choice first to choose the repairer or any other service provider that needs the data, and for that third party to have access similar, or I mean comparable to the kind of access that the data holder enjoys, to be on the same level simply. So we are not trying to completely disenfranchise the data holders. What we are trying to do is to put more parties on a similar position in the market, especially that data holders very often compete against all these third parties in the aftermarket on, you know, repair services, insurance, anything else that needs access to data. So this was our idea. I mean, when the user is already empowered, fine. But we have evidence showing us that in many markets, many situations, the users and the other entities that really rely on the data are not in that position, and they really need the data. Plus, contractual agreements are not sufficient for ensuring this sort of access. So, so there are different perspectives. I agree, there are different perspectives, and where we try to get is to get the balance right. So make data available to more wider range of entities, but not completely sort of deleting the incentives for the data holders.
Thank you so much for this reaction. Now I invite Christiana again to react what she has heard from the other panelists, and I also kindly remind you to stay on time. 3 minutes.
I will.
Thank you so much.
I will try my best, even though I have a lot to say. I think I will try to avoid repeating myself, but my point was, industrial data and industrial value chains are highly complex. And it starts with missing definitions. So we speak about users. Now, for a manufacturer, who is our user? Just take the energy sector. We manufacture switchgear. We sell the switchgear to system operators. System operators have a business. They transport energy. Then there are end users. So there are the people like you and me who use power. They're aggregators that want to sell power. So we are talking with very simplified terms of a highly complex situation. So to the point, there is nothing to fix. That's not the point. On the level of the industrial manufacturers, contractual agreements work. We have to look at the use cases to understand where we need to adjust and where not. Right now, the Data Act is a very simple, even black and white, if you want. There is a data holder and a data user. We manufacture gadgets, and we can make them smarter. Making them smarter costs us money. With that, they generate data. The data is not with the manufacturer. The data is with our customers and OEM most of the time. We then have an agreement with them that we work and help improve their processes. We're not talking about, let's say, in the energy sector, the whole energy trading part. It's very, very, very complex. And that is why my point is the Data Act right now oversimplifies and potentially misses the point of a very good intention. And this is where, you know, we really need to dig into the details. That's why we say we should look at it from a sector point of view, minimum from a use case point of view, to understand what are the horizontal elements that can be aligned and standardized and regulated. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And I give the floor to Jussi if he wants to react on directions or what he has heard from the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it has been wonderfully good discussion. So it's a pleasure. So yes, I think that Mr. Lewandowski very well pointed out that the catchphrase was there that we must get the balance right. And this I would definitely like to echo. So, and so I think that what we need is a minimum level of regulation to put the market mechanism going. So this is an opportunity for data-intensive companies who have their data practices in good order to make most of the market. But on the other hand, we must refrain us in a regulatory sense from going into the details, because then we have those are the treacherous waters that Christian kindly warned us about. It might actually put in danger the IPR and the competitive assets. And I think that with great delight, actually, I read the draft report of MEP de Castillo, where there was quite valuable amendment proposed that to have set out clearly which chapters apply to which kind of data, and that actually serves for the aspect that is somewhat lacking, in my view, from the Commission proposal, that it doesn't perhaps set out direct lines for where goes the level of mandated data sharing and how it interlinks to the data sharing on that is based on contract. And the more complex product you're having, I think there the value of and importance of that contract comes into great value, and it's basically based very much on that. It should be based on that contract, because it's very hard to grasp the right details by the piece of regulation that is applicable to all. And here we must take very good care that it gives good basis for agreements that are agreed between business-to-business parties. On the user side of things, perhaps or from SME point of view, this regulatory standpoint actually might work, but we really need to work on the more to make it work also for the complex business-to-business data sharing relations.
Thank you so much. So with this, it's now time for some questions from the audience. We collected them in the background, and I would now ask each panelist one question, because we don't have much more time, and I would kindly ask you to keep your answer really short, so we can manage to stay in time. The first question goes to Mr. de Castillo. I would just now read it to you. Can you please elaborate on how you see the definition of data holder in the Data Act? In IoT, there are often several services involved in the same product. What happens when there are multiple data holders? Do they have obligations towards each other or only towards the user? Mr. Castillo, are you still with us?
Yes.
Oh,
I am here. I am not moving, no, not at all. I'm here. Yes, well, it is true that there was, let's say, frequently concerns on the data holder, who is the data holder, and how this is defined. The Commission, there was kind of also need for some clarification in the recitals. Well, I don't say the number of recitals, indeed it's 23 and 38. I have had that is the data holder who has that is data holder who has to provide clear and sufficient information to the user on how data generated may be accessed before concluding a contract to purchase, rent, or lease of a product or related services. So this is on the one hand. Another interesting recital, as I mentioned, that I have introduced in this, let's say, area, it is when where I explain that the Data Act assumes that the data holders and the user conclude an agreement on the modalities of who the data can be shared with the third parties. So the obligation to share will, in any case, always exist, even if there has been no agreement on this point. This is, in any case, the obligation exists. But I'll explain that the Data Act assumes that, as I mentioned, that the data holder and the user conclude an agreement on the modalities of who the data can be shared with the third parties. Well, and that's basically that's all. That's all I have to say on that.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Del Castillo. One question that goes to Mr. Lewandowski. It would be much appreciated if you could outline how the Data Act, especially Article 27 on international data transfers, will not lead to substantial obstacles in practice regarding non-personal data, especially having the unsolved Schrems II challenge in context of GDPR in mind, which could create a massive negative impact on EU industry. Thank you.
Thank you. So, well, to be short, I think it's important to note that the Article 27 of the proposal is modeled already on an existing article in the Data Governance Act. So it's not necessarily, say, new as a concept. It is wider in scope, but the exact wording was already used before. And I think it's rather clear from it that what we are actually applying it to is only a very small subset of international data flows, meaning those potential data flows that would follow a request of a third country authority for the data. And what we're trying to simply say here is a bit in the line of what Schrems II judgment gives for personal data, is to apply similar sort of test for non-personal data. So then again, we are talking about only non-personal data, and for the part which, for the kind of transfer which can follow or be a consequence of a third-party access request, sorry, from a third government, so it's a governmental request. This we need to keep in mind. So I think I do not see how this could, in practice, in any sizable way, affect international transfers. What it might affect is put some additional requirements and therefore perhaps burden on those cloud services that will need to perform from time to time a test based on the requirements of the Data Act to be able to know whether they can actually allow such requests to go ahead or not, so they allow the data to travel. But given also that we'll be putting in place competent authorities, well, not we, but the member states based on Data Act, and these competent authorities will be fully competent to give advice, to give recommendations as to how this process has to be carried out. Plus, the Commission itself, with the help of the European Data Innovation Board, will publish guidance on sort of a checklist. I think this eventually will become a sort of a relatively easy, sort of, as I said, the checklist-based approach by cloud providers. So it will just become a part of standard practice and should not really affect in any sizable way international data transfers or complicate them too much. That's for the non-personal data. For personal data, of course, we have different considerations, different legal frameworks, so I cannot sort of venture into this domain.
Okay, thank you so much. Then I will have one more question for Christiane. Do you believe that the proposal provides enough safeguards for the intellectual property rights and trade secrets of European businesses?
In view of time available in this panel, I say no. Again, I think it's very complicated. So I'll keep it short and say no. We don't have enough time to venture into that. And there's one thing I missed earlier. I will gladly pick Ms. Del Castillo up on her offer to meet or send her a proposal. We'll come back to her on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jussi, we don't have a question left for you, but if you want to have one closing statement from your side, please feel free to do so.
Okay, thank you. This is a marvelous opportunity. If I may touch actually the question you posed to Christian before, and I think it really boils down to the definition of data. So if we get that right, then it takes some pressure off from the question of the trade secrets and IPR. On the contrary, if we get that wrong, it puts enormous pressure there, and there the choice that the Commission has made in the proposal, I kind of understand the logic behind it, but I don't understand the consequences. So they can be quite severe. So just going back to the original answer, we need to get the definition of data right.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this last statement. But the very last statement, of course, belongs to Ms. De Castillo. I give you the floor for the closing remarks with respect to the time. Thank you so much for being here.
Well,
and yeah,
yeah,
the floor.
No more closing remarks that saying thank you. Thank you to Orgalin. Thank you to all the speakers and the audience because that was, again, a very fruitful debate. And as I said, there is time for improvement. I am taking note of different things you have mentioned. Well, all in all, I only, in my main closing remarks is yes, to thanks Orgalin for taking so much care of this dossier and be so active and very positive in all respects. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And now with we're pretty much coming to the end. So I will thank everyone for joining, everyone for raising questions. It's a very important topic and we need to stay on it. As you see, the recording of the event will be available soon and you will receive the email with a link to the recording. A news article will be published on Orgalim's website. If you're interested in any news about the Data Act or anything industry related, please register to the Orgalim newsletter to keep up to date with our latest news and events. And you will find very useful links here on the website. And that's pretty much it. I thank you. Exactly. Here's a slide. You will find the Orgalim legal guide on the industrial data, and you will find the position on the Data Act proposal and the Executive Forum for Advanced Manufacturing Declaration. I thank you so much for participating. It was a very, very interesting discussion, and we will keep in touch. And that's it. Have a very nice day. Thank you so much for joining us. See you soon.